A two-star general crawls through Norman mud beside terrified privates. Hand grenades dangle from his chest harness. Anti-aircraft fire tears the night sky. This is not where generals are supposed to be, but Matthew Ridgway never believed in supposed to be. 11:43 post-meridium, June 5, 1944. Inside the vibrating belly of a C-47 transport aircraft crossing the English Channel, Major General Matthew Bunker Ridgway checked his gear for the 7th time. The 49-year-old commander of the 82nd Airborne Division sat among 132 pounds of equipment: main parachute, reserve chute, Mae West life preserver, musette bag, .45 caliber pistol on his hip, Springfield M1903 rifle strapped to his leg, ammunition, rations, maps, compass, first aid kit. And visible to every man who glanced his way, 2 Mark II fragmentation grenades clipped prominently to his chest harness, one on each side, like metallic medals of intent. The younger paratroopers, boys really, 18 and 19 years old, many flying into their first combat, kept stealing glances at those grenades. They had never seen a general wear his weapons like that. They had never seen a general jump with them at all. Ridgway's weathered hands, hands that had signed orders sending thousands of men into battle, now gripped the same static line that every private first class in the aircraft held. Outside, darkness ruled the world. Below, somewhere in that darkness, 60,000 German troops waited in fortified positions across Normandy. Behind, across the Channel, the largest invasion force ever assembled prepared to storm beaches at dawn. Everything depended on what happened in the next 6 hours. The red light came on. Stand up! Hook up! The cabin erupted into controlled chaos, the ancient ritual of paratroopers preparing to throw themselves into the void. Ridgway stood with his men, hooked his static line to the cable running the length of the aircraft's ceiling, checked the man in front of him, felt the man behind check his gear. Through the small windows, he could see what every man in every plane now saw: the darkness below suddenly blooming with thousands of orange flowers. German anti-aircraft fire transforming the night sky into a deadly garden. The aircraft bucked violently. Shells exploded close enough to rock the plane sideways. The pilot jinked left, then right, then climbed sharply, desperately trying to evade the curtain of steel rising from the Norman countryside. Ridgway felt the cold air rushing through the open door. He smelled cordite and aviation fuel and fear. Green light. Go, go, go! He shuffled forward in the stick of paratroopers, reached the door, and jumped into the maelstrom. The plan, as briefed in England under the calm fluorescent lights of the operations tent, had possessed a beautiful simplicity. The 82nd Airborne would drop in a precise pattern west of the town of Sainte-Mère-Église, 7 miles inland from Utah Beach. Each regiment knew its exact drop zone. Each company understood its assembly points. Each squad had memorized its objectives. The division's 13,000 paratroopers would land, consolidate, seize key bridges and causeways, and hold them until the 4th Infantry Division fought its way up from the beaches. By 0300 hours, divisional headquarters would be operational. By 0600, all regiments would report their positions. By noon on D-Day, the 82nd would control a cohesive sector of the American airhead, a shield protecting the invasion's vulnerable western flank. That was the plan. The plan assumed clear skies and accurate navigation. The plan assumed pilots could maintain formation through scattered resistance. The plan assumed drop zones clear of obstacles. The plan assumed German anti-aircraft guns would inflict acceptable losses without disrupting the fundamental integrity of the operation. The plan, like so many plans birthed in the sterile certainty of headquarters tents, lasted approximately 90 seconds past contact with reality. Ridgway's parachute opened with a violent jerk that knocked the wind from his lungs. Above him, white silk blossomed against black sky. Around him, a constellation of other parachutes appeared, but wrong, all wrong. They should have been clustered, a cohesive descent. Instead, paratroopers scattered across miles of darkness like seeds flung by a careless hand. Tracer rounds arced upward, red and green streaks seeking flesh. A parachute 10 yards to Ridgway's left suddenly collapsed, shredded by machine gun fire. The man's scream lasted 3 seconds before he disappeared into the darkness below. More tracers, more screams. Aircraft exploded overhead, one, then another, then a third, turning night into day for brief, terrible moments. Burning men fell faster than their unopened parachutes. Ridgway hung in his harness, suspended between the dying and the earth, watching his division disintegrate in real time. Then the ground rushed up and slammed into him. He landed hard in water. Not the solid earth of the designated drop zone, but cold, black water that immediately closed over his head. Normandy's flooded fields. The Germans had deliberately breached the Douve and Meurthe river dikes weeks earlier, transforming miles of farmland into shallow, treacherous marshes designed to drown paratroopers weighted down with equipment. Ridgway's boots touched muddy bottom, 5 feet down. He pushed upward, broke the surface, gasped air. His parachute, still attached, dragged behind him in the water, threatening to pull him under again. He fumbled with the quick-release mechanism, fingers numb with cold and adrenaline. Got one side, then the other. The parachute drifted away into darkness. He stood in chest-deep water, in absolute darkness, under a sky still bright with anti-aircraft fire. Around him, nothing. No voices, no movement. The sound of aircraft engines fading. The distant crump of explosions. Closer, much closer. The sharp crack of rifle fire. Matthew Ridgway, Major General, United States Army, commander of 13,000 men, stood alone in a French swamp at 0120 hours on D-Day, with zero idea where he was, where his men were, or where the enemy was. He drew his .45 caliber pistol. Standard operating procedure dictated clear command hierarchy. A division commander establishes headquarters in a secure rear area. He receives reports from regimental commanders. They receive reports from battalion commanders. Battalions report from companies. Companies from platoons. Information flows up. Orders flow down. The general sees the battlefield through reports, maps, radio traffic. He makes decisions based on compiled intelligence. He moves chess pieces from a position of informed control. But there were no reports, no radio. His SCR-300 had torn away during landing. No headquarters, no staff. No maps that meant anything in this drowned landscape where every field looked identical in darkness. There was only water and mud and sporadic gunfire, and the certain knowledge that somewhere in this chaos, American paratroopers, his paratroopers, were fighting and dying alone. Ridgway began to wade toward higher ground. The hedgerows of Normandy appeared in military intelligence briefings as simple lines on maps. Field boundaries, minor tactical considerations. Up close, at 0200 hours, with German voices shouting somewhere in the darkness, they revealed themselves as something else entirely. Ancient earthen walls, 6 to 10 feet high, topped with impenetrable tangles of bramble and hawthorn, creating a labyrinth of small enclosures that transformed every field into a potential killing ground. Ridgway crouched at the base of one hedgerow, listening. German. 2 voices, maybe 3, perhaps 40 yards away. He couldn't see them. They couldn't see him. But they were between him and where he needed to go, wherever that was. He had 2 grenades on his harness, 6 magazines for his pistol, and the Springfield rifle. He was one man, a valuable target. The loss of a division commander this early would ripple through the entire invasion plan. The tactical decision was obvious. Avoid contact, move quietly, survive to reach friendly lines, and re-establish command. Ridgway pulled one of the grenades from his harness. He had not jumped into France to hide in hedgerows. The grenade's explosion shattered the night, 4 seconds after he pulled the pin and threw it blindly over the hedgerow toward the German voices. Then he was moving, legs pumping through muddy grass, heading perpendicular to his throw, using the confusion of the blast to gain distance. More shouts. German voices angry, frightened. A machine gun opened up, tracers cutting through darkness where he'd been crouched 5 seconds earlier. He threw himself flat, pressing into the wet earth, making himself invisible through absolute stillness. The machine gun continued firing at nothing. Ridgway lay motionless, breathing slowly through his mouth, tasting mud and grass. His heart hammered, but his hands remained steady on the Springfield. 51 months of command, 32 years of service. Every training exercise, every field problem, every peacetime maneuver had prepared him for decisions made from comfortable distances. None of it had prepared him for this. Lying in Norman mud while German bullets passed overhead, utterly disconnected from the elaborate machinery of modern warfare, reduced to the most primitive equation, hunter or hunted, kill or die. The machine gun fell silent. Ridgway waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. Then he began to crawl. Dawn came slowly to Normandy on June 6, 1944, seeping into the sky like water into cloth, first gray, then pearl, then pale gold. With light came the full revelation of chaos. Ridgway crouched in a drainage ditch and surveyed a landscape that bore no resemblance to any map he'd studied. Equipment hung from trees, parachutes tangled in branches, containers split open, ammunition scattered. Bodies, too, American and German, sprawled in attitudes of sudden death. Fires burned in distant fields. The morning air stank of cordite and burning rubber. And scattered across this broken landscape, moving in ones and twos and small groups through the hedgerows, paratroopers, not organized units, but fragments. Lost men searching for their squads, lost squads searching for their companies, an entire division shattered into 1,000 pieces, each piece trying desperately to find its place in a pattern that no longer existed. Ridgway stood up. 3 paratroopers materialized from another hedgerow line, weapons raised. Then recognition, the 2 stars on his helmet visible now in dawn light. They lowered their rifles, moved toward him with expressions mixing relief and disbelief. "Sir?" The sergeant couldn't have been more than 22. His voice carried the flat accent of somewhere in the Midwest. "Sir, we thought everyone scattered. We can't find anyone." "You found me, Sergeant." Ridgway checked their unit patches. 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, supposed to be 2 miles south. "How many in your group?" "Just us 3, sir. Landed in the water. Lost most of our equipment. Don't know where the rest of the stick is." "Now you're 4. Ridgway pulled out his compass, took a bearing. "Sainte-Mère-Église is northeast. We're going to head that way, pick up every American we find, and sort this mess out." The sergeant stared at him. "Sir, you're coming with us?" "Sergeant, at this moment I command exactly 4 paratroopers, you 3 and me. Yes, I'm coming with you." By 0800 hours, Ridgway's group had grown to 27 men, a collection of fragments from different companies, different regiments, some who'd landed miles from their intended drop zones, all sharing the same experience of isolated confusion. They moved through the hedgerows in a loose tactical formation, weapons ready, gathering strength through proximity. And everywhere they moved, Ridgway led from the front. Not from the theoretical front of textbooks and doctrine, the position from which a commander directs operations through subordinates, the actual physical front, the point position where the lead scouts first encountered enemy fire, where machine gun bullets sought their targets, where death arrived without warning from the next hedgerow. The men watched their 2-star general belly crawl through mud to scout German positions, watched him crouch in ditches during artillery barrages, helmet pressed to earth like any private, watched him signal for flanking maneuvers with hand gestures, then lead the flanking element himself, those 2 grenades still visible on his harness, still ready. Young paratroopers who'd been in France for 7 hours and combat for most of it found something solid in that presence. The brass hadn't abandoned them. Command hadn't disappeared into some safe rear area. A general, a real goddamn general, was here, in the grass, in the fight. The town of Sainte-Mère-Église represented the 82nd Airborne's first major objective. A small Norman town of 1,500 souls, Its strategic value derived from a single fact. Route Nationale 13, the main road between Cherbourg and Carentan, ran directly through its center. Control Sainte-Mère-Église, control the road. Control the road, prevent German reinforcements from reaching the invasion beaches. The 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vandervoort commanding, had landed closer to their drop zone than most units, which meant only that their chaos had slightly more structure. By 0300 hours, Vandervoort had assembled perhaps 150 men from a regiment that should have numbered 1,800. With this shattered force, he'd attacked the town. Now, at 0915 hours, the battle for Sainte-Mère-Église hung in balance. American paratroopers controlled most of the town center, but faced increasing German pressure from the north. Panzers had been reported moving south from Cherbourg. Without reinforcement, without heavier weapons, Vandervoort's thin defensive line would crumble. Ridgway reached the town's outskirts at 0940, his group now numbering 43 paratroopers collected from the fields. He found Vandervoort in a commandeered house serving as makeshift headquarters, the colonel's broken ankle, sustained during the jump, immobilized in a makeshift splint. "General?" Vandervoort's face showed surprise, then relief. "Sir, I have approximately 200 effectives in town. Germans are counterattacking from the north with armor support. I've got one 57mm anti-tank gun and maybe a dozen bazookas. We can hold for a while, but—" "Show me," Ridgway interrupted. The northern approach to Sainte-Mère-Église consisted of open fields bordered by hedgerows, offering attackers covered approach routes to within 300 yards of the town. Through binoculars from a second-story window, Ridgway could see German infantry moving through those hedgerows now, preparing assault positions. Behind them, the distinctive shape of a Panzer Mark IV tank moving into position. Mortar rounds began falling on the town. The Germans were ranging their fire, preparing for coordinated assault. Standard doctrine. Soften the defense with indirect fire, then push armor and infantry forward simultaneously. Against 200 lightly armed paratroopers with no artillery support and limited anti-tank capability, it would work. "Sir," Vandervoort spoke carefully, "if we're going to withdraw to a better defensive position, now would be the time." Ridgway lowered the binoculars and looked at his regimental commander, a man he knew to be brave, tactically sound, and completely correct in his assessment. Withdrawing from Sainte-Mère-Église made military sense. They could trade space for time, consolidate forces, establish a more defensible perimeter. But withdrawal meant abandoning Route Nationale 13, meant allowing German reinforcements free movement south, meant that every soldier storming Utah Beach would face additional enemy fire because the 82nd Airborne had failed to hold a single French town. "We hold," Ridgway said. "Put every man on the line. I'll take the northeast sector." Vandervoort's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, you mean you'll command from—" "I mean I'll take a rifle and find a spot in the defensive line. You need every shooter you have, Colonel. You just got one more." The northeast sector of Sainte-Mère-Église's defensive perimeter consisted of 15 paratroopers scattered among houses and hedgerows facing the main German approach. They were young, the oldest perhaps 25, exhausted, low on ammunition, and acutely aware that enemy tanks were moving toward their position. When a two-star general appeared among them, carrying a Springfield rifle and asking where he could do the most good, several men initially thought they were hallucinating. Private First Class James Kurtz, a machinist's son from Pennsylvania, later described the moment in a letter home. "This general shows up, grenades on his chest, rifle in his hands, asking us where to position himself like he's just another replacement. Sergeant Walker about fell over. Then the general just picks a spot by the church wall, gets down behind some sandbags we'd piled up, and starts checking his sight picture down the road. Like this was normal. Like generals did this every day." They did not. In the entire history of modern warfare, general officers did not typically man defensive positions alongside privates. They commanded from headquarters. They studied maps. They made strategic decisions. They did not shoot rifles at advancing enemy infantry. But Matthew Ridgway had not worn those two grenades on his harness as decoration. He had warned them as statement of intent. I am a soldier first, a general second, and right now this battle needs soldiers more than it needs generals standing safely in the rear. At 10:22 hours, the German assault began. Mortar fire intensified, systematically walking through the town, seeking American positions. The Panzer rumbled forward, its 75mm gun firing high explosive rounds that obliterated walls and sent shrapnel screaming through streets. Behind the tank, German infantry advanced in tactical bounds, one group providing covering fire while another moved forward, textbook assault doctrine. The American line erupted in response. Riflemen fired from windows and doorways. The single 57mm anti-tank gun barked once, twice, 3 times, one round missing, one deflecting off the Panzer's frontal armor, the third striking a track. The tank slewed left, immobilized but still deadly, its turret traversing toward the gun's position. Ridgway sighted down his Springfield at a German machine gun team setting up 200 yards away. He'd qualified as expert marksman throughout his career, but those had been peaceful range days with paper targets and no one shooting back. This was different. The machine gun team moved quickly, professionally. He led the moving target slightly, breathed out, squeezed the trigger. The machine gunner dropped. His assistant immediately took over, getting behind the gun, continuing the setup. Ridgway worked the bolt, chambered another round, fired again. The assistant fell. A third German started crawling toward the abandoned weapon. "Got him, sir!" Private Kurtz, positioned 3 feet to Ridgway's left, with an M1 Garand, fired twice in quick succession. The third German stopped moving. They exchanged no words. There was no time. The battle had entered that compressed state where seconds stretched into eternities and eternities collapsed into seconds, where communication reduced to gestures and grunts, where the difference between living and dying measured in inches and milliseconds. The immobilized Panzer found the anti-tank gun's position and destroyed it with one shot. German infantry pushed closer. 50 yards from the American line now. 40. Then the sound every defender dreads. "I'm out! Last magazine! Need ammo!" Ammunition, the eternal limiting factor, the resource that cannot be wished into existence, the hard mathematical reality that determines when brave men must either retreat or die. Ridgway pulled one of the grenades from his harness. He had carried those grenades 4,000 miles, from Fort Bragg to England to France, waiting for this moment. Not for symbolic purpose, not for intimidation, for use. The German infantry had reached a hedgerow 30 yards from the American position, using it as cover while they prepared their final assault rush. Ridgway could hear their voices, German commands crisp and professional. They would come over that hedgerow in seconds, and the Americans' depleted ammunition would not stop them all. He stood up, drawing immediate fire that chipped stone from the church wall beside him, pulled the pin, held the grenade for 1,000, 1,000, let it cook off to prevent the Germans from throwing it back, then hurled it over the hedgerow in a high arc. The explosion brought screams. Beside him, Sergeant Walker stood with the second grenade Ridgway handed him, pulled the pin, threw. Another explosion. The volume of German fire from that hedgerow decreased noticeably. "Now!" Ridgway's voice carried across the defensive line. "Suppress that hedgerow! Don't let them reorganize!" The Americans rose as one and fired, a ragged volley but timed perfectly to catch the Germans stunned by the grenades. Some threw their own grenades. Others fired their last magazines in sustained bursts. The coordinated fire broke the German assault momentum. The enemy infantry fell back, dragging wounded, leaving bodies in the hedgerow. The Panzer, still immobilized, continued firing for another 10 minutes before finally withdrawing, grinding backward on its remaining track while laying smoke. By 1100 hours, the German assault on Sainte-Mère-Église had stalled. In military histories written decades later, the Battle of Sainte-Mère-Église would occupy perhaps 3 paragraphs. A successful defensive action by the 82nd Airborne, holding critical terrain against German counterattacks on D-Day. The numbers would be precise. approximately 200 American defenders, estimated 400 German attackers, 23 American casualties, 47 German killed or wounded, 1 enemy tank damaged. Those numbers captured everything and nothing. They captured the tactical reality. A small force held a strategically important town against larger enemy numbers. They did not capture the texture of that fight, the specific quality of fear when you hear tank treads approaching and know you have no weapons that can reliably stop armor. The taste of stone dust and cordite, the way time fractures under fire into disconnected fragments, the weight of a rifle that becomes simultaneously burden and lifeline. And the numbers certainly did not capture what it meant to the young paratroopers of the 82nd Airborne to see their commanding general standing in the defensive line beside them, firing a rifle, throwing grenades, bleeding from a shrapnel cut across his forearm that he'd simply wrapped with a bandage without comment. Private Kurtz, in that same letter home, "I figured generals were guys who stayed in the rear and told us what to do. But General Ridgway was right there. Right goddamn there, pardon my language, Ma. When he threw those grenades, when he stood up to throw them with bullets hitting all around, I thought, if he's not afraid to die, then maybe I can not be afraid too. Not really makes sense when I write it down, but that's how it felt." That was precisely how it felt. By 1300 hours, reinforcements began arriving. Not the organized regiments that should have marched in formation from their drop zones, but irregular streams of paratroopers who'd spent the morning fighting their own private wars through hedgerows and swamps, collecting themselves into ad hoc units, moving toward the sound of sustained gunfire because gunfire meant Americans, and Americans meant not being alone anymore. Ridgway met each group personally, organizing them into defensive positions, learning their names, asking about their jumps, treating privates and sergeants with the same attention he'd give colonels. Word spread through the growing defensive perimeter. The old man's here, right here, in the line. By 1500 hours, Vandervoort could count approximately 450 effectives in and around Sainte-Mère-Église, a quarter of the regiment's strength, but enough to hold the town if German pressure didn't increase dramatically. By 1700 hours, radio contact had been established with Utah Beach. The 4th Infantry Division had successfully landed and was pushing inland. They would reach Sainte-Mère-Église by nightfall. The 82nd Airborne had held. That night, in a cellar that served as division headquarters, though headquarters remained a generous term for 1 table, 3 radios, and a dozen exhausted staff officers, Ridgway finally sat down to assess the day's cost. Of 13,000 paratroopers who jumped into France, current reports accounted for approximately 7,000. The rest were scattered, captured, wounded, or dead. Equipment losses exceeded 50%. Every regiment reported severe shortages of ammunition, medical supplies, heavy weapons. The 82nd Airborne Division existed now more in theory than reality, a notional organization trying to impose order on chaos through sheer force of will. By conventional military standards, the drop had been a disaster, yet the objectives had been achieved. Sainte-Mère-Église held, key bridges secured, the western flank of the invasion protected. The Germans, expecting a cohesive drop that could be contained and counterattacked, instead faced 1,000 small firefights across miles of countryside, each led by sergeants and lieutenants making immediate tactical decisions without waiting for orders from higher command. The disaster had worked because, in the absence of organization, individual initiative had flourished, and that initiative had been strengthened, perhaps decisively, by the knowledge that their commanding general was not safely in the rear, but out there with them, in the grass, in the fight. George S. Patton arrived in France 3 weeks later, still chafing at his late deployment, eager to resume the role of public warrior that came naturally to him. He found Ridgway at the 82nd's headquarters near Sainte-Mère-Église, now a genuine headquarters with proper staff sections and organized command structure, though Ridgway still wore those 2 grenades on his harness. "Matt," Patton said, studying his fellow general with a mixture of admiration and something else, perhaps envy. "I heard you jumped with your men." "Yes, sir. And I heard you spent D-Day in a ditch shooting Germans." Part of D-Day, yes, sir. Patton was silent for a moment, his famous temper momentarily subordinate to calculation. Then, the men talk about it. Every paratrooper I've interviewed mentions it. You know what that's done for morale? Ridgway shrugged. I needed to know what they were facing, sir. Couldn't understand the situation from England. Bullshit. Patton's voice held no anger, only recognition. You jumped because you thought it was right. Because you couldn't ask men to do something you wouldn't do yourself. He paused. Also made the rest of us look like rear echelon staff officers, so thanks for that. Not my intention, sir. I know, that's what makes it worse. Patton laughed, then grew serious. But here's the thing, Matt. You pulled it off. You survived. Thousands of men saw you do it. That matters. Leadership isn't just about giving good orders. Sometimes it's about showing up where no one expects you to be. Later that day, Patton wrote in his diary, Ridgway jumped into France and fought as a private soldier. Insane, brave, and probably exactly what his division needed. I wish I'd thought of it. The nickname Old Iron Tits became widespread among paratroopers, though rarely spoken in Ridgway's presence, more of an affectionate term traded between enlisted men, a way of acknowledging the unusual general who wore his lethality openly. The grenades remained on his harness through the rest of the Normandy campaign, then through Operation Market Garden in Holland, then through the Battle of the Bulge, where Ridgway took command of the 18th Airborne Corps and helped stop the German offensive. Younger officers asked him about D-Day, about the decision to jump, about what it felt like to command from the foxhole level rather than the map level. His answer never varied. A commander needs to see with his own eyes. Maps lie. Reports lie. Sometimes you have to get down in the dirt to understand what's actually happening. But there was more to it than tactical assessment, and the men who served under him knew it. There was moral weight to a general who shared danger. When Ridgway appeared at the front, not for photo opportunities, but for actual combat operations, it transformed the psychological equation. The distance between command and execution, between strategic conception and tactical reality, collapsed. Soldiers fight for many reasons: duty, patriotism, unit cohesion, fear of letting comrades down. But they fight with different intensity when they know their commander isn't directing the battle from comfortable distance, but is in it with them, subject to the same risks, sharing the same fear. Decades later, military historians would debate the effectiveness of Ridgway's leadership style. Some argued it was dangerous, that losing a division commander to random enemy fire would have caused more harm than any boost to morale. Others noted that generals in World War II faced far lower casualty rates than enlisted men precisely because they stayed in headquarters, and perhaps that disparity needed challenging. But the paratroopers who landed in Normandy that night needed no debate. They knew what it meant when they saw their general crawling through the mud. They knew what it meant when he stood to throw grenades while bullets searched for him. They knew what it meant when he asked where he could do the most good, and meant it literally. Where can I position myself to kill the enemy and prevent them from killing you? Private Kurtz survived the war, returned to Pennsylvania, worked in the same machine shop his father had worked. He died in 1992 at age 69. At his funeral, his grandson read from the letters Kurtz had sent home from Europe. One letter, dated June 10, 1944, ended with these lines. People back home think generals are like kings or something, sitting in palaces giving orders. Maybe some are like that, but General Ridgway isn't. He's a soldier. I know because I saw him be one. I watched him stand up when everyone else was lying down, because standing up was what needed doing. I won't forget that. I don't think anyone who saw it will forget it. Matthew Ridgway rose to become Supreme Commander of NATO, then Army Chief of Staff, retiring as a 4-star general in 1955. He lived to age 98, dying in 1993, outlasting nearly all the men who jumped into France with him that June night. He gave few interviews about D-Day specifically. When pressed, he deflected attention to his soldiers. I commanded brave men. They did the fighting. I just tried not to slow them down. But in his personal papers, opened after his death, Historians found a journal entry dated June 7, 1944, written in the Sainte-Mère-Église cellar. Spent yesterday fighting as a rifleman, not the role of a division commander per doctrine, but doctrine assumes functioning communications, organized units, known enemy positions, none of which existed yesterday. What did exist? Frightened young men scattered across enemy territory, needing to know they hadn't been abandoned to die alone in French ditches. Could I have commanded more effectively from a rear headquarters if such headquarters had existed? Perhaps. But command isn't only about efficiency. Sometimes it's about presence, about being willing to share the risk you've ordered others to take. Would do it again. On the fields outside Sainte-Mère-Église, a monument now stands commemorating the 82nd Airborne's actions on D-Day. Tourist buses stop. Guides explain the tactical situation. Children run through grass that 8 decades ago ran red with blood. The monument lists names, the commanders, the units, the objectives achieved. It speaks of courage and sacrifice in the measured language of historical commemoration. It does not, cannot, capture the visceral reality of that night and day, the terror of the jump, the isolation of scattered drops, the desperate improvisation that somehow produced victory. And it cannot capture the moment when a 49-year-old general, trained in the formal protocols of command that placed officers at safe distance from enlisted men, chose instead to grab a rifle and fight beside 19-year-old privates because that was what the situation required, what his conscience demanded, what leadership actually meant when stripped of peacetime pretense. The grenades on his harness had been real. The bullets seeking him had been real. The choice to stand when standing meant becoming a target, that had been real. Everything else was just rank and metal and the comfortable fictions of hierarchy. Matthew Ridgway had understood something fundamental about command that many generals never learned. Authority derives not from stars on your collar, but from willingness to share the burden you place on others' shoulders. Not occasionally as symbolic gesture, but genuinely, to the point of personal danger, to the point where the distinction between general and private blurs in the mud and chaos of combat. On June 6, 1944, in the darkness over Normandy, a general jumped into chaos. He landed in grass and swamp and German fire. And when dawn came, revealing a battlefield that matched no plan and followed no doctrine, he did not retreat to safety to re-establish theoretical command. He picked up his rifle. He found his men. He fought. That was the whole story. Everything else was commentary.